When I was about, well, give or take my early 20s, I ended up working for the Westpac Bank in Australia, and I had worked for a guy called George Montgomery. And George said something to me once, which has always stuck in my head and kind of goes with another point I'll make in a second. When we were having a cup of coffee one day, and George was a big friend of mine. That's another interesting story about. Meanwhile, we're having a cup of coffee, and there was a little quirky little bookshop down the road from us, and it was the sort of thing which produced all the, I guess we'd call today conspiracy books, and the ones that we were focusing on were things that books that came out, things like the coming debt crisis and the collapse of the fourth industrial revolution, and books that were just not mainstream. But I was looking at this bookshop and the people that were coming in and out of it, and I said to George, I've looked at this bookshop for a while, and I've noticed that there's basically two types of people coming out of this bookshop. And George said, "Oh yeah, okay." And I said, "Well, one of them is, it's arty people and people that you might be young students who are on the dole, and they've all got the earrings in the ears and the punk rock and the whole fuck the system kind of going on, the t-shirts and the other one, and they've come out with a little book which they've probably paid, $5-10 a week on lay-by to get. And then the other one would be all these guys who've come out, and we were in the middle of the banking section, so there was a stock exchange not too far from us and lots of other banks all around. Another group would be all these guys who came out in beautiful suits and had Rolex watches and would come out with a big pile of these books. And I said, I can't help noticing that these two groups are the opposite of the economics. And, what's going on here, George? And George, who's a third generation banker, turned around to me and said, "Well, that's really simple, Ben. It's the people at the bottom of the food chain know what reality is because, well, the first ones normally to feel the boot on the back of the neck. And then there's the people at the top of the food chain who, they make their money by knowing what's going to happen next, and that's how we stay on at the top of the castle." And George, I seriously thought he was one of these people at the top, and actually was probably, in reality, was just another middling like most of us. And he said, then there's the great vast of people in the middle, which actually make their livings by not asking two questions, and they live in a bubble, and they don't want to know what's going on, because if they did, they would probably end up losing their social position, and so they know they've got it right, so they just doff their cap and keep along. And I have to say, that's been my life experience. I grew up when I was younger, and my mum is an artist, and growing up with her, 1970s, divorce parents, which was not unusual, but it was not the common. And there were times when our dog actually ate better than us. We were not a wealthy family when I was growing with my mum. And then, at one stage of my life, during my teens, I went to my father, and he imported ski equipment, and we'd go skiing in the weekend at various lodges, and it wasn't unusual for me to be, as a teenager, having dinner with princes from the Emirates, or, millionaire bankers. These were part of my social circle growing up in families, German families that had been businesses for, hundreds of years, and had a very sophisticated idea about, how the world rolled. And it has always struck me ever since that, when I'm dealing with people on the very top of the food chain, or I should say the very bottom of the food chain, little dyslexia hand signals going in there, um, that's my experience. And, I look what's happening now in 2020, and I can see the billions of dollars that our government has laid out pre-COVID-19, but now labelling it as being part of COVID for infrastructural base, for roading, um, for waterways, which when you match with things like the state sector reform bills, and the water regulatory bills, they are in a recipe. They are a recipe for privatisation, and it's basically that what's happening now is Labor is going through the same motions that they did when we elected Labor under the Longer government, where they are putting on a great show of appearing to be liberal, and anybody that comes out and attacks them is immediately assumed that you must be voting National. When that's, you might notice I'm wearing my Black Ball Miners Strike t-shirt. Very much a big fan of Norman Kirk, and actually a big fan of socialist principles. I'm a political scientist, so when it comes to the whole pin me down, then it's not so easy, because I think you find that most political ideologies after a while do actually morph into something else. But back to my point is that we've got a middle class at the moment that is basically thinking that they vote this year and they vote for Labour, that they're going to get a nice little government, and and they're not paying attention to the professionalism of the fact that people delivering this are professional communicators. And it's the same as we've seen articles going, isn't it so great that we've now got these science communicators for us? And they're not scientists, they are spin doctors. They are spinning an agenda and an ideology, and we're increasingly seeing that the response that we've dealt to this situation is coming apart, and it's going to be the people that's going to impact the most is actually going to be the middle. Well, it's going to be the poor, and they feel it the hardest, but the middle class, that's where all those businesses are going under. Um, Unemployment is increasing. And meanwhile, the companies are going, yeah, it's great. Let's go out, listen to big tech. No, there's no dangers of 5G, and no, we won't consider the fact that there might be an issue with vaccination. And trust me, I'm actually pro-vaccinator until regulations are allowed to be cut, until a product is allowed to be rolled off production. I mean, it takes even a good vaccine, and I know that creates a lot of amongst some of you, but a vaccine that does more benefits than harms takes years to develop, and they're talking about rolling out something next year. So they're basically saying, screw the regulatory controls, we're just going to pump the stuff out. The people that this is benefiting the most is the companies like Jeff Bezos. Stock's gone up over 1100%. Big Pharma. You go and look out there. These guys have just made a massive wealth grab, and the poor get it because they're going to be the first to hit it. The rich know it because shit, they're making it like bandits. And it's only the very group in the middle who are getting themselves torn apart by reactionary left wing and reactionary right wing, because that's the whole game plan, that are not getting it. So, that's my whole point today, is that, you've got the poor, you've got the rich, and then you've got the clueless middle class.